Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to this first family day here in Montreal. I want to talk today about some very practical things for families. And I want to start, so the idea of peace, of course, is an interesting one. By peace, of course, we mean not war in particular, but also peace as a context in which families can thrive and get along. It doesn't mean they're quiet, right? Loud music can be blasting, and there can be vibrant disagreement, but it can still be peaceful. So, peace is one way to think about a context for families to function well. And that raises the question about what makes a family a healthy family. What is healthy family functioning? And what gets in the way? And how can we promote this healthy environment of constructive conflict when we have conflict, of understanding and support and validation, and create this peaceful family environment? So that's what I want to talk about this afternoon. So I guess sometimes we start with the end. Here's where I want to go. I want to explain what we think of as a healthy family transaction between two people. They could be parents and children, partners, siblings, any important relationship. And I call this the relationship two-step. It's a little bit of a dance that we do. And when it works, it's quite lovely. The idea is that a very basic foundation is that one person is expressing himself or herself in an accurate way, a descriptive way. And I will go into some detail about what that is and how to do it. And the other person is listening and is paying attention in a way to understand the person who's expressing himself or herself, and that person responds in a validating way, communicating the legitimacy and the understanding of what was expressed. And then, of course, notice the arrows go both ways, because when we express ourselves more accurately, it's easier for people to understand. And when people respond in a validating way, it's very soothing and invites us to express ourselves in an even more descriptive and accurate way. And of course, in a healthy dance, it's not just dancing always in one direction, it also goes back in the other direction. These people can flip roles, and another person can express him or herself accurately, and the other one can validate. So that's where we want to go. I want to talk about how to get there and the steps that are involved in creating this very healthy relationship two-step. First of all, I think it's important just to acknowledge that at some level, to talk about communication is a bit superficial. Everybody knows how to communicate effectively in some ways, but somehow we forget. Literally, we forget. We have a lot of conflict and hurts, we have misunderstandings and worse. And this forgetting is actually quite real. Let's talk about what actually happens, what gets in the way. That's what gets in the way. Okay, that's my pictorial view of emotion dysregulation, or very high emotional arousal. Now, I want to be clear. Many people today have talked about emotion dysregulation, and I just want to say, from my perspective, emotion dysregulation is not the same as being upset or even having a lot of negative emotion. One can have lots of negative emotion or positive emotion. One could actually be very upset and still regulated. Dysregulation occurs when the pain involved in the arousal is so great that we turn our attention to simply getting out of the pain, and we lose sight of what our goals were in the first place. And our long-term goals become irrelevant or unavailable to us, or literally, we forget that the person that we're interacting with is someone that we love. So actually, that's what happens in our brain. When our brain gets that pumped up, that highly negatively aroused, we actually become binary in our thinking. Good and bad, right and wrong, threat and no threat. And when we're dysregulated, the other person is a threat. Of course, that's not literally true. 10 minutes later, 2 hours later, the person's not a threat, but at that moment, we experience it that way. So the person, when dysregulated, focuses on the immediate reduction of painful arousal. And this most often occurs in the context of important relationships. It turns out that most emotion dysregulation, which is of course at the root of most behavioral dysregulation, occurs in important relationships where our behavior becomes reactive and impulsive, not planned. Typically we do things that we regret later on. And in relationships, dysregulated behavior is either of an attacking variety or a withdrawing variety. Now, anybody here ever been in a relationship that just didn't work out well? This is a test. If you're not raising your hand, I know you're not listening to me. Okay, all right, very good. Sorry, or you're just extremely young, and good luck with that. Anyway, now I don't want you to get stuck on this relationship that didn't work out well, but would you say that part of the end of those things that didn't work out well were always either somebody was attacking the other person or somebody was withdrawing from the other person? Aren't those the two definitions of it not working out well? Right? So it turns out that those are the two kisses of death in an important relationship, attacking and withdrawing. Because you don't get the goodies in a relationship when you do one of those. So we need to understand the fundamental things that drive attacking someone you love or withdrawing from someone you love. Notice the paradox. Attacking someone we love doesn't make sense, right? Why would we attack someone we love? Well, it doesn't make sense except that we're dysregulated and we forget that that's someone we love. Why would we withdraw away from someone we love? Well, we're not feeling the love at that moment. Okay. Now, Perry Hoffman this morning talked a little bit about emotion dysregulation and the different components of it. I'm not going to spend time on this because I think this is just a different way of diagramming this. But from the perspective I want to talk about today, emotion dysregulation is in the center. Okay? Think of this as the centerpiece of our arousal and of our behavior. And then around it, rotate things like how we feel about ourselves, low self-esteem, and difficulties we have in relationships, and fears of abandonment, and judgments, and impulsivity, and so forth. Now, what happens is that emotion dysregulation causes these other problems on the outside, but also is in turn caused back to increase by these same things. So impulsive behaviors are attempts to escape from dysregulated emotion, but impulsive behaviors also create further dysregulated emotion. And that's what we call a transaction, where each part influences the other. In this case, it's an escalating series of transactions. Negative emotion goes up, dysregulated other behaviors go up, and further dysregulate. Okay? So the idea is to break these cycles. That's what we're going to try to do. So emotion dysregulation, for our purposes today, the key thing is that when we get dysregulated, we don't express ourselves accurately. Now, accurately meaning in the big picture, our authentic selves, what we really want. Okay, remember that person that you didn't get along with ultimately? Anybody ever say anything mean to someone that you love? Anybody ever do that? Trying to keep you awake after lunch here. Come on, help me out. Okay, so that moment, now it doesn't have to be a relationship that disappeared or tanked, but when we say something mean to someone we love, can you see how it's, in a fundamental way, that's not accurate? That meanness is an impulsive attack. It's not, oh gee, I love you so much, I think I'll call you a jerk right now. No, and in fact later you think, gee, I called you a jerk, but you're not a jerk, you're a wonderful person. I love you, how could I call you a jerk? Well, my brain was on fire, that's how I did it. Okay? Now, so emotion dysregulation creates inaccurate self-expression. That's the attacking or the withdrawing. When other people see us attacking or withdrawing, it's very hard to understand what we're not expressing, because we're not expressing it, and so they fail to understand us and typically invalidate us. You shouldn't feel that way. You're a bigger jerk. Okay? I don't know if you actually have conversations like that. That's not the way things go in my house, but something like that. You get the idea. And then, of course, that invalidating. Anybody like being invalidated? Does that anybody like get up in the morning? Oh, I hope I get like 17 big invalidations today. You know, probably not, right? So invalidation actually increases negative emotion and emotion dysregulation, and this cycle continues. And so this is the cycle we're going to try to break. Now, we've done research in my lab. We actually study things like how families interact with each other and how emotion regulation seems to be a linchpin in those transactions. In this study, what we did was we stressed people out. We took volunteers, ordinary volunteers. We told them we were going to stress them out. We just gave them, actually the stressor here was arithmetic problems. Okay, now that doesn't sound like much of a stressor, but we made them very hard and only gave them 20 seconds. They got them all wrong. Every subject, every trial got the wrong answer. And we, because we're mean psychologists, we were prepared to tell them they got the wrong answer even if they got the right answer. None of them did get the right answer, so we didn't have to do that, but they all got the wrong answers. And look, what happens is you keep giving people things that they look like they can do and they can't do them, they can't do them, they get, oh, look at what happens. Negative arousal or stress goes up. Now this negative emotional arousal, this y-axis, represents both self-report of how stressed out people feel, but it also represents their physiological arousal because we wired them up. We wired them up and measured their vagal tone and their skin conductance, you know, their sweating and their heart rate reactivity. We recorded all of these things. I'm only showing you one slide because the pattern was quite the same across all of these different measures. So we stressed them out. What they didn't know is that the experimenter actually was going to either validate or invalidate them. They had been randomly assigned for the experimenter to be a validating experimenter or an invalidating experimenter. So the experimenter would say something like, so, can I pick on you? So, how's it going? So you just got several things wrong. You thought they were easy. You got them all wrong. So, how's it going?
Well, I feel bad.
Just the microphone.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I don't think I've got it. The problem, I mean.
Okay, now watch. I'm going to make eye contact, right? I'm making eye contact. I nod a little bit. My face is relaxed. I don't know if you can see me back there. It's like, oh, so this was kind of, it seems like it was kind of frustrating for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Especially, you know, it's a really tough problem for 20 seconds, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, you know, don't forget the whole purpose of this experiment was to get you stressed out.
Yeah, well, it actually succeeded.
Yeah, sure. That makes perfect sense, right? How can you tell, was I the validating or the invalidating experimenter? I hope it, yeah, validating, right? Okay.
I'm going to
Okay.
the invalidating.
You see what's coming, right? Okay, so how's it going?
Well, it was a bit tough.
Okay, now notice, I take my eyes away. I break the gaze and I look at the floor. I tilt my head and I go back and I go, huh.
But don't you think it's a bit difficult, those 20 seconds for this problem?
Really?
I'm generally pretty good at maths.
Huh. You know, most people don't get freaked out about this. It's just an experiment. No, I don't know if you can see, but I have this incredulous look on my face. Okay, how you doing over there? Do we need to talk you down here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now of course then we give him some more problems that he gets all wrong, and then some more problems that he gets all wrong, and look what happens. If I invalidate him, that's the red line. His arousal goes up in the beginning and stays up. He's in pain by the end, whereas the green line, even though his arousal is up, if I start to validate him and I give him more problems and he gets them all wrong again, and then more problems and he gets them wrong again, look what happens with the green line. It comes 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down. It's just like life, right? You come home from work, how was your day? It was terrible. I told you this job was not the job you should have taken. Okay? Not quite what you're looking for. Why did I come home, right? But if the person puts things down and makes eye contact and says, what happened? You know, it's actually making the, you know, all of a sudden it feels better. Okay, the stressors are still there, but it feels better. Well, it turns out that this validation part is a soothing, evolutionarily derived behavior that we can do. It has to be real. It's not what we say, it's what we feel. It's that we get it. And what we communicate from getting it, we don't have to make our face be relaxed because we are relaxed. We don't have to maintain eye contact because we are interested. We don't have to use a voice that's soothing because we are soothing. It comes from the deep understanding of the other person's experience. So, neat trick, right? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about, how to do it. So we know that criticism and invalidation hurt, and they increase emotional arousal and the urge to either attack or withdraw. We also know that validation reduces negative emotional arousal and reduces the urge to attack or withdraw, and in fact, increases the urge to stay present and interested. Validation also increases positive emotion. Okay, so lots of good stuff going on here. All right, so what does it look like in general in families, and what does it look like in your family? That's the question. So think about this. When things are going well, whatever that means for you, in your relationships, would you say that there's some accurate expression maybe going on and somebody's validating somebody? And when things aren't going well, when somebody's having an urge to attack or withdraw, would you say that there's a breakdown in this cycle and more likely to be inaccurate expression, judgments, criticisms, and invalidation? All right, so here's the model. I'm going to step through this. In your handouts, you've got the last slide. I'm just going to pick this apart step by step. Okay, so now this is what we're going to call the transactional model. Now this is true for everybody. This is not just a borderline phenomenon, not just a mental health phenomenon. This is a you, me, and everybody else phenomenon. And so the idea is that something happens. Now, presumably, mostly the something that happens we're talking about here are negative events, things that we don't like. So when something happens we don't like, naturally, because we are emotional beings, we've evolved to have emotion for good reasons, we have an emotional reaction. That's always true, okay? So if I go to work and I want to go tell my colleague, say good morning to my colleague that I was out on vacation last week, and my colleague is on the telephone, that's an emotional event. How do I feel? Disappointed, right, it's an emotional event. Now, we don't know how much disappointed I am, that depends on a lot of things, but the event itself creates some arousal, okay? If you're waiting for your 15-year-old to come home on a Saturday night from a party, I'm not going to say what time that's supposed to be because that varies quite a bit from place to place, but whatever time that's supposed to be, it's 45 minutes later than that time, okay? That's an event. Your child is late, and the cell phone is on voicemail, automatic pickup, right? Okay, so that's an event, okay? What's the emotion you'd have there? Yeah, fear. You'd be worried about your child, right? That's especially the first time, right? Maybe by the 30th time it's different. We'll see why that is. Okay, so that's the first step. Now the second step, though, is not about the event, it's about us. It's how vulnerable are we to getting dysregulated. And there are several parts to that. Our temperament has something to do with that. Our temperament has to do with how emotionally sensitive we are, how emotionally reactive we are, how long it takes us to calm back down when we get upset. Those things are what we call temperament. That's a little bit, are what we're given biologically, but also a lot of what's happened in our lives, our biology transacting with the events of our life. So temperament is not unchangeable. It moves slowly, kind of like a glacier, but it does move over time, or it can move over time. But it also vulnerability has to do with our current biology. Are we tired, or are we not tired? Are we hungry, or are we well fed? Are we not feeling well? Do we have the flu? Do we have a headache? Do we have a backache? All those things make us more vulnerable to having a bigger negative reaction, okay? So we have an event, and then our vulnerabilities might jack up the emotion, or they might not. Maybe we're well-watered, well-fed, somebody just gave us a hug that loves us, and so when the event happens, you know what, actually, it's the only arousal we have is from the event. There's not much vulnerability. On the other hand, maybe we're kind of temperamentally sensitive and reactive, and maybe we're hungry and tired, and maybe somebody's been yelling at us lately in the last few minutes or the last couple of hours, so our baseline is high, and so when that event happens, it just leverages that event. It feels much bigger on that occasion. All right, now there's a third source of arousal, which I'm going to call specifically judgments, which are very specific kinds of ways of thinking about either the event, another person, or ourselves. Okay, now judgments are a binary way of thinking. They tend to spin things into being right or wrong, good or bad, should or shouldn't. Now, The trouble is that when our arousal goes up high enough, our brains automatically go to this dichotomous or binary thinking. Also, that's why the arrow goes in both directions. So if emotional arousal goes up high enough, it kicks judgments off. We can also just have a judgmental style, which just contributes further to more emotion. Now, if arousal gets high enough, that leads to dysregulated behavior. Now, that dysregulated behavior could be dangerous stuff like self-harm and suicide attempts, or sort of problematic behaviors like substance use or staying in bed instead of going to work or school, or binging or purging. Or they could simply be dysregulated relationship behaviors like anger, attacking, and withdrawing. Okay? Now, what happens, of course, is that regardless of what the manifestations are of being dysregulated, if our arousal is high enough, we become inaccurate, right? That's when we say something like, now your child comes in an hour late after he or she's supposed to be in, and you're late, you're up late, and so you're really tired, and it's been a while since you ate. So what do you say? You're grounded for life, or something like that, where the hell have you been? Or something that's not that, wait a minute, didn't we just say, what was my emotion? Oh, right, I was worried. It's hard to say, oh, honey, I'm so relieved you're home, I was worried about you. That would be really nice to say, wouldn't it? But maybe that's not what comes out. And I'm not saying that doesn't come out. If it does, that means you stayed regulated. But if what comes out instead is, where the hell have you been? You're never going to do this again. Then, well, maybe there's a little dysregulation going on. Okay? Now, then of course it's easy to get the response like, with an eye roll. Right? Like that response of yours is not legitimate. Why? Well, because it isn't. Okay? So it's probably invalidating the invalid, but it's still invalidating. Okay? Of course, what does that do? It results in other stuff. Now, wait a minute. But of course, the person who's invalidating also has his or her own emotional arousal, his or her own vulnerabilities, his or her own judgments. Because of course, guess what? If we're dysregulated, we're more likely to invalidate as well. Basic problem is that I can see you and I can hear you, but I can't comprehend anything you say or do. Okay? Anybody ever been in this kind of relationship before? Yeah. Okay, so the fourth step is that when we get invalidated, that kicks emotional arousal back up again. That's the fourth source of negative emotional arousal. And of course, if this happens, and of course that may at that point kick in further dysregulated behavior. And if it happens often enough, we call that a pervasive history of invalidating responses. Fancy way of saying it happens enough that it actually makes us more vulnerable. Okay, remember that relationship that you said didn't work out that well? Think about the end of that relationship, okay? The end of that relationship, there you are, you're sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a glass of water, that's what you're doing. And the person that you're in the middle of crashing and burning with just walks into the kitchen. What happens to your emotion? Yeah, quite a few of you are saying and it goes up. Is that positive or negative emotion going up? Negative. Okay, now take a deep breath. Now roll the clock back to the beginning of that relationship. You're falling in love. You're sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a glass of water, and the other person walks into the kitchen. What happens to your emotion? Also goes up. Positive or negative? It's different, right? More positive. Now, what's the difference? The same behavior. Person just walked into the kitchen. That's it. That's it. That's the person's behavior. But so the difference isn't the event. The difference is our vulnerability to the event. That pattern of invalidating history that's been going on for weeks, months, or years. Okay? That's the conditioning that comes out of it that we have to work against. All right, so how do we avoid this dysregulation, this distancing that results from this, the conflict and the suffering, and instead get back to accurate expression and validation? Well, the first place we're going to start with is what we call opening your mind before you open your mouth. Okay? Now, this sounds easy, but it's actually quite hard. Okay? So opening your mind before you open your mouth is the first step. So most intervention strategies with families start with, how to communicate. They start with communication. They start with opening your mouth. But in our program, actually, out of the 10 steps in our program, typically, we don't actually ask anybody to open their mouth until step 6. So we have 5, the half of our program is how to get ready to open our mouths, how to get ready to have the other person open his or her mouth, to be ready to have a transaction that's accurate, in which validation is possible. All right, so the steps, let's pick this apart. So the steps towards accurate expression include mindful self-awareness. If we're going to be accurate, we have to stop and say, well, what do I feel? What do I want? What do I think? What am I actually noticing? Now, what I feel may not be just what do I feel right now, but is that really what I feel? Is that really what I want? Okay, I might have an urge to say something very caustic to my wife or one of my kids. Is that really what I want to do? Do I really want to say something mean to somebody I love? No, I don't really want to, but I have an urge to do that. Okay, that's not, my self-awareness might get me saying, well, no, that's not really what I think. That's an urge, it's an impulse. It's not the same as an authentic desire. How do I regulate myself? How can I manage my emotion and keep my emotion connected to this situation, not what happened yesterday or last month or 3 years ago, but actually what's going on right now? And how can I stay descriptive and stay in reality? Now, that sounds easy, right? Oh, stay in reality. Okay, here's the problem. Okay, when you call someone you love a jerk, okay, is there such thing as a jerk? No, there isn't. Not even in New York. Okay? Sorry, New Yorkers. I have friends and relatives there. Okay, they aren't jerks either. Now, why would I say that? Because, okay, let's say I said to you, I met you outside there, and I said, you know, I want you to go in and I want you to find the jerk in there and bring them out and have something to say to them. Not so easy. Not so who do you find? Anybody going to raise your hand? Oh, I'm the jerk you're looking for. Probably not. Okay? But if I said, oh, find the guy sitting toward the front, you know, with the orange striped shirt with the name tag that says Mike on it. Oh, that sounds descriptive. We can find Mike. There he is. Mike is absolutely not a jerk, I want to be clear. Okay? Seriously, he's anything but, okay? So, you see, so descriptive reality is reality. Judgments are not part of reality. They're spins. They're concepts. Maybe about reality, but they're maybe not about reality. They might be more about the person who's talking than about reality, right? Like if I say, oh, gee, this is I'll pick on this pen. I don't know whose it is. Okay, this pen. Is it a good pen or a bad pen? See, it's good and bad are concepts, but it's a pen. That's descriptive. So what about your child, your partner, your parent, your best friend? Jerk? Or somebody who just did something that hurt your feelings? Right? My feelings are hurt because you just did something. That's descriptive. You're a jerk is not. Try validating. Okay, I want you to validate. You're a jerk.
You sound really upset.
Oh, we have a therapist in the room, yes. I sound really upset. Well, yeah, okay, but it's, how about, you know, you really hurt my feelings, you know, when you didn't invite me out to go to the movies with you. Is it a little easier to understand what I'm talking about? I'm sorry, you really hurt my feelings. Can you understand? How about, you're a jerk? What are you going to validate? Are you the jerk? I'm not the jerk, right? See, in this world, there's no jerk. Jerk gets us away. You realize I'm using jerk as a substitute for words that I'm not supposed to say on the microphone, right? Okay, so, right, whatever your own family uses for those kinds of things. But jerk isn't a word we use in my family either, you know, so, right, so, but it's a substitute. Think of it, it's just a proxy we're working with here. So, but in fact, there's no such thing as a jerk. Okay? Now I have to admit, can I curse just a little bit? I'm going to quote, okay? So like I have a client right now, and she's very fond of referring to people that have hurt her feelings as assholes. Okay? That's her favorite term. Okay? And I hear that maybe 5, 6 times in a given session. So-and-so's an asshole. And my response is like, I'm having trouble picturing that. How does the person speak? I can see where it comes out, but where does it go in? I don't understand. And that usually gets her to stop, and then she'll say something like, okay, well, he or she did this. Oh, I get it, because now you're describing what the person did. Because when I say, gee, this person's a jerk, all that tells you is that I'm upset with the person. It doesn't tell you what the other person did. Notice how the judgment takes our attention away from us to the object of our judgment, but in fact it doesn't tell us anything about, this is a crappy pen. It tells you nothing about the pen, but it does tell you something about me, that I don't like the pen. Something about the pen is bothering me. All right, so that's what we're trying to do, is stay descriptive in descriptive reality. More on that later. Part of that is describing what I feel as a primary emotion, okay? And I'll come back to that in just a second. What I want, what I think, and what I notice. This is the descriptive part, describing it, okay? This doesn't have to be modulated in a small way. Again, you can have a lot of emotion and still be regulated. So you can express yourself big and still be regulated. This is not trying to make people always be neutral and, talk in a very modulated way. People can yell at each other, that's fine. Well, it might be fine if they're descriptive. Okay? All right, so let's take this one step at a time. So the awareness, the mindfulness piece, noticing and describe. Okay, repeat. Notice, describe, repeat. Now this is awareness of ourself, okay? So if we're in a situation where the other person, your parent, your partner, your child, your best friend, somebody else, does something you don't like, okay? And I'm gonna use that phrase because that's a kind of reasonable descriptive term. The person did something you don't like. There's something about it you don't like. Then you have an emotional reaction to that. Can you notice it? Where do you feel it in your body? What emotion is that? What would most people call that emotion? How intense is it? Is it all from that event, or is some of that emotion left over from what happened a few minutes ago? Or some of it because of how you're thinking about it? Okay? That's what we're paying attention to. How much of this emotion is my emotion, right? If I have a sunburn and someone pats me on the back, how much of that pain is really because the person's patting me on the back too hard, and how much of that pain is because I had a sunburn when the person patted me on the back because he or she was happy to see me, right? The pain is very real, okay? Don't underestimate. I'm not saying the pain, I shouldn't have the pain. I've got the pain, but the source of the pain is primarily the sunburn. Without the sunburn, pat on the back might just feel nice. With the sunburn, it might be excruciating. And I say that as a person who's had lots of sunburns. Okay. I used to have red hair. Okay, managing our own arousal. Now this is, of course, worth a whole book by itself, but managing our arousal turns out to be really important. Now, the first part about managing our arousal has to do, those people are actually from here. That's true. I'll tell you about it later. Managing our emotions. Now, Les Greenberg, Jeremy Safran, and others have written about the distinction between what we would call primary and secondary emotions, kind of fancy terms for a primary emotion is the emotional response we have that's normative and typical and adaptive, okay? And you don't actually need to know anything about the person or the person's history to know what the person's primary emotion is. So just like I said earlier, if I want to go talk to my colleague at work, I'm excited about something and my colleague's on the phone, somebody said, oh, I'm disappointed. Right, you don't have to know anything about me. All you have to do is understand the event, right? If you're driving along and you've got the green light and somebody is driving through the red light, coming right toward you, screeching on their brakes, how do you feel? Afraid, right? Primary emotion makes perfect sense, right? And so forth. Okay, so there's fear, there's sadness, there's shame. We heard an interesting discussion about shame and guilt this morning. There's anger, there's love, there's surprise, okay? There are different primary emotions. Now, the trouble is that in our society, often we can unlearn those primary emotions. Okay? Anybody ever have the experience of driving along and somebody cuts you off? How do you feel? How many people are angry? Okay, see? Now notice, a minute ago we said in these dangerous car situations, fear is the primary emotion. Well, if somebody's cutting you off, fear is still the primary emotion. But if it happens enough times, you can actually recondition it, because it might be easier to be angry at the person than to be afraid. Fear for some people anyway, takes a bigger toll than anger. Okay? Society tends to tolerate anger better than fear. Okay? So, can you see how in that situation being angry is a conditioned response? Or maybe because you're judgmental, maybe because you say, that person was a jerk. Notice when you get judgmental of other people, it creates anger. It takes the emotion, the intensity of the other emotion, and transforms it into anger and jacks it up. If you get judgmental toward yourself, I'm a jerk, I'm a bad person, it does the same thing, except instead of anger, it becomes shame. Okay? Those are secondary emotions. They could be primary emotions in other situations, but they also can often be secondary emotions. So secondary emotions are responses either to primary emotions themselves, people are kind of jumping out of it, I can't stand it anymore, or through overlearning or conditioning, they become problematic and become the initial response. We could actually jump right to a secondary emotion. So primary and secondary doesn't mean it's the first emotion you feel or the second emotion you feel. Primary means that without conditioning, without training, it would be your first emotion. Secondary means that it's a learned emotional response, a conditioned response, or it's in response to a judgment. Okay? Now our strategy, of course, is to try to find the primary emotion. The primary emotion is the part that's going to be accurate in its expression, and to refocus away from secondary emotions as less helpful. All right, so we're going to stay in descriptive reality, let go of judgments, let go of interpretations, try to stay descriptive. Okay? So those primary emotions means that we're going to if we take the judgment out, we don't get to anger. Remember, we have these two problems, anger and withdrawal. If we take the judgments away, whatever emotion we start with stays there. The judgments don't transform them into anger. I have families like this in my office every week. Okay, so now I'm going to say something that might be a little bit provocative for you. I'm going to say that anger is corrosive in relationships even when it's justified. Okay? Now let's think about this. Can you think of a situation where anger is essentially helpful in your close relationships? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, come on, take me on. I know some of you think this. Go ahead. Yeah. Lots of people say it promotes change. Can you give me an example where you need it?
Yeah, sure. I got lots of work to do on myself.
Say that one more time.
There's lots of work I have to do on myself.
Lots of work you have to do yourself.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm your partner?
Sure.
Okay, and you're stuck doing it yourself. Okay, and you're pissed off at me because
You're mad at me.
I'm mad at you.
Yeah.
Because,
Because I have things I need to work on.
oh, I don't get that though.
I have improvements to make.
Yeah, but why would that make me angry that you have improvements to make?
Because clearly, whatever behaviors I have right now are not good.
You're imperfect.
Yes.
And I'm angry at you for being imperfect? I'm having trouble with this one. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to generate a head of steam that you're imperfect. If there's something you're doing that's maybe hurtful to me, right? Like literally you're stepping on my toe, or emotionally, metaphorically stepping on my toe, that would hurt, right? I would feel that would be my emotion. Anger might be a common reaction to pain, okay? But that's not a judgmental kind of, that's just like, stop it. Like, that's a very short kind of anger. Maybe that's helpful. Although I would say just asserting yourself and being determined would be just as effective. Okay, I'll give you an example. So a dear friend of mine and I, we were out to dinner, and she was having this conversation with me, and she says, anger gets you moving. It gets you unstuck. You need anger to actually do this. And we were having dinner, and the waiter was not being particularly attentive, and it was time to go. And she's like, you see, I'm really angry with this waiter, And I said, oh, were you ready to go? She said, yeah, I was ready to go 20 minutes ago. So I got up and I went over to the waiter. I said, excuse me, could you get us the bill, please? And I came and sat down. I said, which was more effective, your anger or my determination? Yeah, I know, it's kind of pissy of me, wasn't it? But nevertheless, right, the point is, anger actually got her stuck. It actually didn't get her unstuck. Being determined about, what's my goal, knowing what she wanted and knowing that she was my friend, well, okay, I'll go get the check. That was easy enough. Anger didn't help me do that. Awareness of my goals helped me do that. So now, the trouble is that anger is highly supported culturally. And so this is an uphill battle for families. All right, but we're going to try to transform anger in your family. We're going to try to get you back to primary emotions without judgments. Okay? And the idea is that even if it's justified, another emotion is always also valid. Even if the anger itself is valid, another emotion is also valid, and probably more important with respect to getting the relationship to move the way you want it to. All right, now accurate expression includes the expression of primary emotion. That's the point. And a descriptive approach without any judgments, without any interpretations, that's the way to be accurate. Not like, you need to do this because if you don't, you're a jerk. Well, how about I really want you to do this, and this is why it's important to me, which is going to motivate you more. I don't know if you have this comic strip. That's called Zits. This is Jeremy. Jeremy says, my new philosophy is to live in the moment, unless the moment, sucks. And then I want to live in some other moment. Well, she thinks that works for her. Now, when we talk about mindfulness, that's not what we mean. We don't mean mindfulness when it's easy. Mindfulness is something we practice when it's easy so we can do it when it's hard, right? It's like riding a bicycle. You practice riding your bicycle on flat ground so that you can take on a hill, okay? So mindfulness is not, gee, I'm mindful, it's a beautiful day and I'm having a picnic out on the hill. I can be mindful of this and enjoy it. No, mindfulness no, it's raining and I can't have the picnic out on the hill that I planned. Okay, how do I manage that? That's a different, more challenging circumstance. So that's how we work on opening our mind before we open our mouth. Part of it is accurate expression, but part of it's validation. How do we validate? How do we open our mind to validation? Well, this is a small study that we did in my lab also. The idea here is we looked at parents of clinic kids. These are teens, actually. And that's the yellow bars. And we compared them to parents of non-clinic kids, a community control sample. And we just brought them into the lab and we had them have discussions between the parent and the teen about how things were going in their family. And then we had people who didn't know anything about them rate how validating or invalidating the parents were. And as you can see, the parents of the clinic kids, that's the yellow, are much less validating and much more invalidating than their community controls. Now, this is not to blame parents in the slightest, okay? Because, of course, what I'm not going to bother to show you is that if we looked at a similar slide looking at how accurate expression you get from the teens, you'd show similar accurate expression in the teens was much lower in the clinic kids than in the non-clinic kids, okay? So there's this reciprocity going on, okay? Anybody ever see this before? My very favorite, the eye roll. All right, so how do we get toward a validating response? All right, first is we have to manage our own emotion, okay? Now, the whole idea is that for the person who's responding, if I'm going to respond to you, what you do is my event. Remember, the event pulls for emotion, and then I got my own vulnerabilities and maybe my judgments, okay? But your event, whatever you do, is the event. So what's my emotion in response to your event? I've got to try to keep it there. I've got to reduce my vulnerabilities. I've got to manage my emotion, not let judgments get in the way. So I've got to be present to you, okay? And really pay attention to you. What are you saying? What are you wanting? What are you thinking? Okay? So that when my son comes home late, okay, on a Saturday night, I can think, okay, what was I doing when I was his age? Well, I was coming home late on a Saturday night too, for sure. Okay? Anybody else ever do that? You know, only a few scofflaws around here. Okay, very well-behaved people. But I think, you know, what's it like for him? What would make it hard for him to extract himself from something that's fun to do? Gee, at his age, you know, my youngest son is 13, so it's like, well, what's it like to pull yourself away from a party when you're 13? That's a hard skill. You're having a great time, have to leave. That requires emotion management. So I sort of think, okay, this is not that easy. And I want him to be home on time. Okay? It doesn't mean just because it's hard, he's not supposed to do it. It just means that, okay, preserving the relationship might be a way to help him do this. All right, so notice my own reactions. Like, I don't like it. I got worried. I got worried about him. I didn't know where he was. That's me. That's my emotion about his behavior. Okay? He probably wasn't thinking about the fact that I was worried. Then, what does make sense about the other person's experience? Okay, so he says, gosh, I lost track of the time. It's like, okay, is that possible for a 13-year-old to lose track of the time when having a lot of fun? This is not hard to imagine, right? Is he being disrespectful? Okay, I just want to tell you, disrespectful is a judgment. It's not such thing as being disrespectful. Not in a descriptive world, right? Does that make sense? I know 3/4 of you disagree with me. Nobody's saying it, but just hang in there with me, okay? That doesn't mean I like it, but was his staying out late actually about me from his perspective? No, it's about me from my perspective. My pain that I was worried, not about being, if he taught there and said, I don't respect you, Dad, I'm not going to come home on time just to show you that I don't respect you. I don't think that's what he was doing. You know, I think he was distracted and having a good time and thinking about whether he could get away with it, maybe. Or maybe he didn't even think of what time it was. And then we can say, what do I understand about your experience? What does make sense about your experience? That doesn't mean we're finished. There's also the other part, like, okay, and what's going to happen? Okay, but does it make sense? Okay? Okay, so my oldest son, when he got his driving license, I guess he was 16, at dinner he said, you know, gee, I'm sure it would be so much easier for you, he says to my wife and me, you know, you wouldn't have to be taking me to school or taking me off to do all these things if I had my own car. So I was thinking that would probably be really nice for you if I had my own, if you bought me a car. Clever boy, right? You know, yeah. So now, notice, like, saying, does that make sense, by the way? Of course that makes sense. He's 16, he has no money, right? He's 16, he had no money. Parents, could we afford to buy him a car? Yeah, probably, yeah, if we really wanted to. Notice saying it makes sense, saying it's valid to want it doesn't mean we had to get him a car, which we did not do, by the way. Okay, wouldn't have been, I mean, if we wanted to, that'd be fine, but we didn't want to. We had 2 cars, we thought that was plenty, and so forth. Okay, does this make sense? So you can validate the person's experience and what the person wants, what the person's feeling, and not have to do what the person's asking you to do. That's a separate question. Okay, but a lot of people feel like, oh gosh, if I validate that it makes sense that you want it, that means I have to do it. No, it can make sense that you want it and make sense that I don't want it. Then we have to negotiate. Or if I'm the parent, we don't have to negotiate. Okay, that's a different story. Okay. Questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay, so lots of times I think people get stuck thinking, well, gee, if we really take the time and put the energy into validating, that means that we have to do what the other person wants. No, not necessarily. They're completely separate questions. We're not being a pushover by validating. We're not being overly nurturing by validating. We're simply understanding and communicating the other person's not crazy. All right, now the steps toward validating responses. First, we have to, of course, manage our emotion. We have to bring our attention to the other person. We have to own our own reactions, focus on what makes sense about the other person's experience. Then we can validate, and then we can possibly move on to problem solving. That's the change part. But that might mean, oh, okay, you want us to buy you a car? Well, we could do that. Or it might mean, well, no, it makes sense that you want us to, and no, we're not going to do that. But then we might have to problem solve. Why does he want it? He must be disappointed. Maybe there's something he wants to do, and we have to find some other way to get him there. You know, who knows? All right, so Now we're in real time. Okay, we've learned a few skills about accurate expression and validation. So now we're in real time. Stop making things worse. Okay, this is where we start. What that means, of course, is that something's going on that's quickly escalating. And I've got an urge, or you've got an urge to make it worse. You've got an urge to express yourself inaccurately. Call me a jerk. I've got an urge to invalidate you. Well, you shouldn't feel that way, or it's your own damn fault, okay, or whatever it is. So we each have urges to escalate toward inaccurate expression and invalidation. We've got to stop making things worse. So what I would suggest is that you practice when you have that urge to be judgmental, to be invalidating, to be inaccurate, to actually just say, okay, that's an alarm. That means that my arousal is right now high enough that it's got my brain going in this binary way. So let's first cool my brain off. So take time out, take time away. In my program, we have people do what we call toilet mindfulness. It's actually not being mindful of the toilet itself. It's going to the toilet room, because people don't typically follow you there. And then you can sit or stand or lie on the floor and nobody bothers you, and you can have 2 or 3 minutes kind of with impunity to just have a glass of cool water or splash some cool water on your face and think about what actually your goals are, your real goals, not the goal of being meaner than what the other person just did, but the other goals. All right, make sure that you're well fed, well watered, well rested, and healthy. Okay, is this the time? Anybody ever have an argument just upon turning the light out as you're going to bed? Anybody ever do that? Is that a good time to have that conversation? That's probably not. I don't know you, but I'm sure that's not the time to do it. Soothe yourself. Find a way to soothe yourself. We can soothe ourselves, any of our senses. We can listen to music. We can distract ourselves with pleasant activities, all kinds of things we can do. And, this is the big one, we've got to find enough diminished arousal to make room for that memory. Ah, yes, this is somebody I love. Earlier Valerie said something about, forgetting that, that people don't have memories. Well, nobody has memories at this level of arousal. That's the way our memory works, right? When we have high negative arousal, our memory is encoded emotionally. So what we remember are other situations with high negative arousal. That's why when you're having an argument with your partner, all you can remember is the other arguments that you've had with your partner. All you can remember is the other times that this person did crappy things. But when you're in love with the person can do no wrong. You don't remember the crappy things. That's normal. That's a normal, healthy brain. Our memory is emotion dependent to some extent. So what we've got to do is bring our arousal down and remember, this is somebody that I love. This is a relationship that matters to me, okay? And it's my goal to maintain or improve this relationship. Now, there are a lot of things we can do. For example, if you're a parent, parents, when your children were infants, did you ever just go while they were sleeping in a crib and just stand there and look at them? Smell behind their neck, that kind of stuff, right? I'm not being too weird American thing, am I here? You know what I'm talking about, right? Right? Parents do those sort of things in Canada, I suppose, right? Okay, good. I didn't think we were that different. Well, it turns out that, when your 15-year-old is driving you crazy, now you probably can't put your nose in the nape of their neck. That's probably creepy at that point. But what you can do is you can go crack the door open when they're sleeping and just look at them for a minute or two across the room sleeping. Okay? Now, why? Because that's your brain is going to kick in. Ah, yes. Oh, yes. This is right. This is the one that was that. Oh, all right. I do love this one. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's there. I had to uncover it for a while, but it's there, right? And that makes a big difference. So when the kid gets up in the morning, instead of you're like a hockey goalie ready for battle, okay? It's like you don't have the mask on and the pads are down, and it's like you're happy to see the kid, And it's believe me, the kid can tell what's going on when he or she walks into the room, okay? If you're ready for a fight, they can tell. If you're just thinking in a nice, sweet way about the kid, that might be different. That might be nice. Okay, it might be worth getting used to. All right, now relationship mindfulness includes description, particularly describing the other person, what the person's doing right now. Person's sitting down, not making eye contact, wearing a red shirt, has tension on his or her face. Like right now is doing something, not the history, not the judgments. Okay? Notice your own experience. Find the connection, your caring, your love. What's your emotion right now that you can describe? In the context of this is somebody that I love, I have the motivation to say descriptively, I got so worried when you didn't come home when you were supposed to, and you didn't answer your phone. You had your phone turned off. I was really worried. And you know what? And I don't like it when you turn your phone off in those situations. I really want to be able to find you if I'm worried about you. Okay? You see, now we got two things. We had the validation part, which included, it makes sense. I understand that, you're having a good time. And the expression, I get it. I get what happened with you, but also this, I was worried. And I don't want you to turn your phone off in these situations. That's the change part. No phone. No phone off. That's why you have a phone. That's why we pay for the phone. Okay? And then you can look deeply at that experience and the chain of events that led to that person's behavior. I get how you could have done this. I get it. Okay? Whatever the behavior is. Whether it's coming home late or using substances or self-harm or, doing something that's probably not making it to school in the morning. Are those good things? No, they're problematic. They're very problematic things, but they could make sense. We could understand them. Again, just because we understand it doesn't mean we're not going to work hard to change it, but understanding it is the first step towards being able to change it. All right, so we have to find out what matters most to us that's not reactive, that's not automatic, that's not part of our thinking and our analytic selves, not part of our judgments, and not part of our shoulds. This is somebody I love. That's the place. We've got to find that in us. It's there someplace. Okay. Notice my role in our transactions. So you did something I don't like, okay? But I've got a role here. My relationship mindfulness is okay, what am I contributing to you being dysregulated? Okay? If I can be mindful of you, that's going to help reduce your negative arousal. Okay? We call this reciprocity, okay? The fact that we're linked, whether we like it or not. What I do has an impact on you. What you do has an impact on me. I've been a family therapist now for almost 30 years. And in family therapy, I would say virtually 100% of the time when people come in, whose fault is it? Sorry. Yeah, it's the other person. And what do you want? Change the other person. Shape up the other one. Whether it's partners or parents and kids, it's always fix the kid, fix the partner, not help me do something different. Not never, but almost, okay? But the reality is, if what I do affects you, and what you do affects me, maybe the best way I can get to change you is by changing me, okay? So we're separate, we're two different people, but we're also linked in this ongoing transaction of reciprocity. There's no way around that. And it's actually, turns out, research, sorry everybody, I feel so bad saying this, but actually the most effective way to change the other person is to change ourselves. It's the most effective way to do it. And if we go in just complaining and nagging, and telling the other person that they're screwing up, it has very little impact beyond the immediate moment when the other person then either reattacks us or withdraws. But if we can do something different, that's motivation for the other person to change. All right, so here's the example, one example. He or she is a fill in the blank jerk. Bloody jerk, can I say that? Okay. Okay, let's translate that into descriptive world. I don't like what you just did. Okay, see the difference? Now, I don't know what you did. What'd you do? You know? Came home late. Not just late, but we were supposed to go to my parents for Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? Tomorrow, I don't know, let's say it's, your Thanksgiving was Monday, right? right, yesterday. So Sunday, you're supposed to travel to my parents' house, which is a few hours drive, but you came home from work so late that now we can't go. And you don't like my parents very much. I could interpret that a lot. Easy to do. Or I could just say, you know, I'm just so disappointed that either we have to drive very late or we're not going to get to go, you know, and I really don't like the fact that you came home so late. Okay? That's a better start than you're a bloody jerk and then storming off and slamming the door. Right? One leaves the possibility of us doing something about it and, you know, moving from there. How about he or she is just trying to hurt me, or whatever you just did, or whatever I just did to you, or that proves that you don't love me. Well, if we're going to translate that into reality, it's I don't understand why that person did that. Because that's true. I don't understand it. Did you really try to do that just to make me miserable? I mean, seriously, how often, how many of you, at least once a week, intentionally make it your business to try to make another human being miserable? Now be honest. At least once a week, you intentionally try to make somebody else miserable. Nobody. Look at this. Nobody. You know what? I believe you. We don't do that very often. I'm not going to ask you if you've ever done it, because then we'd all have to raise our hands. But it would be not the norm, right? How many people think that other people regularly do things just to piss you off? Don't raise your hand because you'll see the little inconsistency, right? But you probably do run around thinking that, right? But in fact, if we translate that, what that really means is I don't understand why you did that. Okay, so I didn't come home, let's make it me. I didn't come home from work in time, so now we can't drive to your parents' house for Thanksgiving. Maybe you just don't understand why I came home so late. Why did I come home so late? Maybe I don't understand why I came home so late. Or maybe I fully understand it, and it had nothing to do with trying to ruin your Thanksgiving. Or maybe it did. At which point we still don't understand why are we going to your parents for Thanksgiving. I mean, that's another story, right? You get the idea. All right. Now, one way to do this is something that we call managing or finding curiosity. Now, curiosity is a very interesting emotion, it turns out. Curiosity is absolutely contrary to anger. You can't be angry if you're genuinely curious. And curiosity is an approach emotion, so you can't withdraw if you're curious, because you don't want to. You're curious. You want to understand something. You want to be in something. So curiosity is in some ways the antidote to both of the problems that we have in families of attacking and withdrawing. Curiosity. The trouble is, it's very hard to just flip the switch on curiosity. That's why it's step number 4. But the quicker you can get to curiosity, the quicker you are out of the quagmire. Okay? So now one question to ask is to say, well, okay, whatever you just did that I don't like, what would get me to do that behavior? And you can't say, I would never do it. Okay? Because under some circumstances, we would all do it. So the question is, what would get me to borrow your car? Like, let's say that you're my brother, and you borrow my car because your car is all wrecked. And so you borrowed my car, and you were going to a job interview, and you had a really good job interview. It went really well, and so you stopped off and visited a friend and had a few drinks and then crashed my car. Okay? Now, what would get me? Now, of course, I'm sanctimonious. I don't drive after I've been drinking. Of course, I would never do that. Well, what would get me to do that? What would get me to borrow your car and have too much to drink and drive anyway? What would get me to do that? Any ideas? What would get me to do? You don't have to know me to just have to what would get anybody to do that? Habit. Right. If I have the habit of associating drinking and driving as being compatible, that makes it a lot easier to do it. That's right. And I don't have that habit. That's a very interesting way of putting it. Huh. What do you think now? That doesn't excuse it, by the way. Right? Doesn't condone it, but we're trying to understand it. Okay? So habit that's an interesting one. Okay, what else could get me to do it? Yeah, big emotion. Something big happened, and I had a lot of emotion and kind of didn't have such great appraisal abilities. Sort of wasn't paying attention enough to how much I was drinking or that I was impaired. Okay. Does this make sense? Now, you see, we're being very descriptive. One of these, or we could come up with 5 more or 10 more, one of these might actually be accurate about why my brother did this. My brother actually didn't do this, or maybe none of them are, but the point is that if we can come up with even one way of understanding it, that means the behavior can be understood. Because of course the behavior can be understood. It didn't happen for mystical reasons. Behavior always has causes. Okay? So, now that doesn't mean, by the way, again, don't forget, just because we understand it doesn't mean that we like it. It doesn't mean we're not going to work very hard to have it never happen again. That's a different problem. But if we understand it, we're keeping the lines of communication open. We're not using attacking. Does punishment work, by the way, as a change strategy? Very, very short. Very, very short. What happens is people who are being punished won't do the behavior in front of the punisher anymore. But the behavior stays there, right? No, that's really what happens. I mean, there's 100 years of research on punishment. It's our least effective change strategy. Okay, so we've got to replace fear of the unknown, okay, with this curiosity. We've got to recognize that we don't know, we don't understand, and the solution to not understanding is not invalidating, the solution is understanding, curiosity. All right, so we've got to retrain our brain. That's all. That's easy, right? Well, maybe easier than you think. Well, one model for retraining your brain is E.T. Remember E.T.? Steven Spielberg, extraterrestrial? Okay, now, so here's what I want you to do. Okay, so I hope everybody's still with me here. What I want you to do is just take a moment and put up your index finger. Okay, now touch your index finger to the person next to you. Okay, and what do you notice when you do that? Now, this person, I just want to point out, has been sitting next to you for the last hour. But now maybe is a little more inside your sphere of awareness? Maybe? Okay. It's very hard. Now you got a circle going there. That makes it very hard. Just one person. Just one, you're trying to do kumbaya over here, and that's okay. That's a community kind of thing. But if it's just one person, right? One person, it's like that physical touch. It's very non-threatening, okay? It's a little weird, okay, E.T., it's a little weird, but it's very non-threatening. Non-threatening is very important because if somebody is upset and they're about to get dysregulated, threat is a big deal. So being non-threatening is very helpful. So just touching fingers says, okay, you're in my sphere of awareness. I'm paying attention to you. And it actually makes everything else recede a little bit. Now, this is not a magical thing to do, and you don't have to do it with just fingertips. You can also hold hands. You can touch the back of the other person's hand. You can touch the person on a shoulder. But physical touch, non-threatening, non-aggressive physical touch can help our brains focus in a very non-aggressive way. They have to modulate it. You can't be doing it the touch in an aggressive way. Not at all. I mean, the touch has to be decidedly non-aggressive, very neutral. Okay, now if you don't like ET, you can also just make gentle eye contact. Okay, same thing. Find the person at your table, just one other person, and just right between the eyes, just like, okay, right? Isn't that's more intense maybe than you're used to, right? Person's right there. Right there. I'm not talking about a glare. You've got to relax your face, okay? Gentle eye contact, okay? What happens? Now, what happens? What do you notice when you just make that gentle eye contact?
Bonding.
There's some bonding. There's some connection, right? This is what we're trying to do. Again, I'm not trying to be silly or this is not technique-y. These are things that you can actually you're trying to change your brain. We want your brain to actually help you focus, okay? Be able to pay attention on purpose right now to one thing. So gaze is very important. Turns out that most of us, culturally, we make eye contact briefly and then look away. That's the norm, right? Different cultures, the amount of time you hold on to the gaze is different. It might be different in power relationships, like you've got an adult and a child, it might be different, or you've got a boss and an employee. But most cultures, it's not, if you keep the eye contact, it's often a glare, but then there's a lot of facial tension that we pick up. And if you just keep the eye contact for 2 or 3 seconds, that's different, especially with gentleness on your face. What do you notice? What do you notice? Yeah.
I don't know. I was kind of thinking about what you were talking in.
Yeah.
But, on the first
Yeah,
eye contact,
yeah.
that was gentle and
Right.
smiling. Yeah.
Right, and it just kind of pulls you into, okay, now there's the two of us here. And maybe some of these extraneous things aren't so relevant. Holding hands. This is, of course, appropriate in some relationships and not in others. But if it's obviously with partners, with friends, this is appropriate. For parents and kids, it's appropriate. It's important, of course, that both people be willing. It's also, instead of holding hands in a more romantic way, it's also possible to just put your hand gently on the back of the person's hand. Shoe mindfulness. All right, no, I'm not Imelda Marcos, okay? The idea is your brain training. Remember brain training. So if you're really upset with the other person, you start by looking at the other person's shoes and actually just starting to practice description. They've got brown shoes, they have laces, they're tied, they're not tied, they look scuffed, they've got low heels, high heels, worn leather, blah, blah, blah. And as you start to describe, your brain is getting primed for description, and it's getting away from judgments. And then you can actually look up at the whole person in a descriptive way. Whereas if you start with the face, you might just say, I'm so angry, what a jerk. Instead of like shoes. Shoes are easy to describe. Let's describe the shoes. And then we'll take that practiced describing up to the rest of the person. Anyway, we have other exercises like breathing together. This could be breathing together, literally just synchronizing your breathing across the table. If you're a couple, you actually can do this nose to nose. Yes, you can breathe in each other's air. It doesn't hurt you. You're doing it anyway all the time. Sorry, that's true. You know that, right? Never mind. That's another story. Okay. And you can also just describe the other person when the other person's doing something and doesn't even know you're paying attention. That can help bring us into that person's orbit as well. All right. Now notice we did a lot of things before it's time to validate. And of course, we're only going to validate valid things. Okay? So, for example, on the left we have different ways of validating, and on the right, different corresponding ways of invalidating. I'm not going to go through all of these, one by one, but I just want to say that there are many ways to validate. You don't have to always have a big verbal statement. Sometimes you can simply say, small things, like here's validation basics. Ready? Mm-hmm. That's validating. Like, I'm paying attention. I know. Right? Especially if the other person's upset with you. Instead of saying, you shouldn't be upset with me, I could say, look, I know you're really upset with me. Okay, I do know that. That is true. Even if I didn't do what you think I did, you're still upset with me. Is that true? Yes, that is true. And after you calm down, I'll explain to you that it wasn't I that borrowed your car and cracked it up. That was somebody else, assuming that it really was somebody else. How about asking a question? What happened? That's validating. Being curious. What happened? Of course, that makes perfect sense. You're not crazy. I'd feel that way too, right? Of course. I get it. And me too. Me too is kind of important in very specific circumstances, right? You go out on a first date, and at the end of the night, your date says to you, I had a great time, I hope we can do this again. I wouldn't try, I wouldn't say, I know. I wouldn't say, what happened? What made you have such a good time? I wouldn't say, of course you had a good time, you were with me. If I really wanted to ever see this person again, I would say, me too, okay? There's not just those situations, but also like when the person's trying to wind down. It's like, I'm so tired of us fighting. I want to get along better. Me too. Okay, that's what's needed. It's not like, well, if you weren't such a jerk, we wouldn't be fighting in the first place. No, me too. And then let's get to work. Let's go. Let's do what's needed here. All right, but it's tricky. We're only going to validate the valid, okay? We're not going to validate, we're not going to invalidate valid things, okay? Doesn't matter what the temperature is, if it's, 15 degrees Celsius in our flat and you're warm, okay? It doesn't matter that I'm cold or vice versa. You feel what you feel. I'm not going to invalidate something that's valid. And we're also going to try to not validate invalid things. But it is okay to invalidate invalid things, but only sometimes, only after validating the valid many times. Okay, everybody with this, you got to say this very fast, right? Validate the valid, don't invalidate the valid, don't validate the invalid, and it's okay very occasionally to invalidate the invalid, but only after validating the valid many times. Okay? The reason this is tricky is because everybody wants to start by invalidating the invalid. How you're wrong, right? I'm invalidating the invalid. Well, sometimes it's important to do that, but the ratio is like 10, 12, 15 to 1. You got to validate valid things more often than invalidating invalid things. We can safely say it would be fine if we never invalidated anything valid and we never validated anything invalid. All right, practice this at home. All right, and then, of course, we move on to problem solving, if we need to, okay? Sometimes the simple understanding is enough, and we can stop there, and sometimes the understanding creates the opening. Okay, now what are we going to do about it? How are we going to get you home on time? How are we going to get you safe? How are we going to improve this thing between us? Okay? The problem solving is going to work better when we're regulated, we're mindful, we know what we want, we know we care about the other person, we understand the other person's experience and point of view. That's all going to facilitate problem solving if we need it. All right, so this is the 2 steps, okay, right? Person A is going to work on self-awareness and description of what he's or she is feeling or thinking or wanting. That helps keep the other person's arousal down, and that makes it easy to express accurately. The other person, because person A is expressing accurately, person B also is managing his or her own emotions, also has lower arousal, can pay attention, can use relationship mindfulness to understand the other person, which makes it easy to validate. And of course, being understood, being validated, keeps the first person's arousal down. And this starts to sound like communication. And it's not anger, it's not aggression, it's not withdrawal. Okay, so the idea here is that when we understand, we naturally validate. And when we validate, the other person feels love. And this is where we started, a peaceful kind of environment. Okay, thank you. Any time for questions? Or
Yes, there's actually about 6 minutes time for
okay,
questions.
perfect.
Yeah.
Good.
You want to? I think
You have any questions? Happy to. I got a couple minutes for questions. Valerie. No, I like is a description of, like if I say I'm hot, that's descriptive. I like, I don't like, those are descriptions of my experience.
That I feel.
Well, like, I think, no, I don't think we have to parse words that carefully. I mean, I think feeling would lend itself to an emotion term, like actually is a sort of cognitive / emotional term. It's a crossover. But I could say certainly I feel happy, I feel disappointed, but I could also say, I don't like that. I don't like that is, don't forget, emotion is not just the word, but it's the tone and the body posture and all those things. We try pretty hard to not constrain people's natural responses as long as they're authentic. We try to get people to the position where they're feeling regulated and then allowing their natural responses to come out, rather than trying to get people to behave in ways that don't seem natural. I know our teens sometimes say, the parents go through some of our parent training and they say, "You're trying to validate me, aren't you?" And it's like, and the parent says, it's like, well, which is the right answer? Yes or no? Which is going to work better here? And it's like, don't worry about that. If you're trying to understand the other person, if what comes out is validating, that's great. Don't worry about it. Yep.
You mentioned that to get people to the natural state. What if the natural state is dysregulation?
Well, I don't think a natural state is dysregulation. I think it can be a common state. People can be conditioned to have a lot of dysregulation, but I've still never met the person who didn't have a regulated state. That's possible to be regulated too. Now, we know that some people have higher baseline, but higher baseline doesn't mean dysregulated. It means they're closer to getting dysregulated, but not dysregulated. I mean, we have some clients with a lot of suffering and a lot of problems, but all of them have many states of regulation, with positive emotion, with negative emotion, with neutral emotion. Yeah.
What do you do when you have a person who is obviously very angry and just glares at you,
Yeah.
and you come in and you say, I feel like you're angry,
Yeah.
tell me about it, and they just glare at you and just
Yeah.
refuse to communicate.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, don't forget, if we're in this for the long haul, we can recognize that whatever I do right now may or may not work this moment, but it's contributing toward us developing a better pattern. Okay? So for example, do it with me. You be the glarer, okay? What's our relationship? Am I the parent, you're the child, or vice versa? You're my teen? You're the child. How old are you? 20-something? Okay. And what's your name? I would know this if you were my child. Isabel. Okay. I hate it when I forget my own kids' names. I have 4, and they don't like it when I forget their names either. Okay. So you're glaring at me. Isabel, you look upset.
I can't even say what she would say.
No, you can. We're all adults here.
F you.
Whoa, you really are upset. Okay. What happened? Well, it's got to be pretty miserable to be you right now. I mean, you've got all that kind of corked up. I'm going to go in the kitchen and work on the dishes. If you want to come and chat with me about it, I would love to hear about it. It's up to you, of course.
You should know.
Maybe you think I should, but I obviously I don't. And if I did, then I'd probably have something else to say. Maybe you're going to have to tell me if you want me to know. So what do you think, sweetie? Could you maybe give me a hint here? Play 20 questions, Jeopardy.
You get the gist.
Oh, no, don't give up on me. No, I'm just getting started here. No, my point is...
About there, I'm like going, okay, I'm doing the dishes.
Yeah, no, I can go do
have
the
an
dishes.
agenda.
But the point is, what I'm not doing is I'm not making it worse. Can you see that? I'm not making it worse. And I'm worried about you. I could say, well, I'm worried about you, but I also know that it doesn't work for me to try to push you too hard when you don't want to talk to me. So seriously, I'm going to go work on the dishes, but I'm not trying to avoid you. I mean, I really would like to talk to you, but that's up to you. Okay? All right, so come and talk to me if you'd like. I would love that. Then I go to the other room. Notice I'm leaving the door wide open. It's hard for you. You could, but it's hard for you to feel truly abandoned by me with that. Okay? This is, of course, a big issue with people who have problems with abandonment. It may be, under those circumstances, not useful to stay, but withdrawing could be misinterpreted as not caring or abandoning. So we have to be very, very verbal about what it means that I'm going to the other room. We have to be super telegraph it in big, bold font.
Okay. There's one more. Maybe the last question.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Quickly, just clarification for your resource,
Yeah.
Family Guide to VPD. Is that families using DBT
Yes.
or?
Well, the book
Yeah.
on the left has been out for a while. The book on the right's coming out in the winter or the spring, so it's not quite out yet. And it's a resource that families can use. We call it a crossover. Yeah, so it can be used in a clinic as well, but it's got all of these skills in it and lots of practices. It does not require a counselor. No, family could just pick that up off the shelf, right? And it's kind of step by step. Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
All right.